We are Gaia's champions, her warriors and protectors. Part of this function is to understand and appreciate the fine balances of life in and around us, and we have failed. This is a difficult truth to swallow, but you must force down that painful pill, cub. Some may argue it is too late to make a meaningful difference, whilst others still cling to hope, whilst others wish to bring about the apocalypse, dine in the fiery balls of glory and honor. Whatever the truth may be, I hope to restore some semblance of peace to Gaia, even if that does mean delaying the dying inevitable. To do this, we must discuss the Triat, three of the greatest entities in the spiritual hierarchy: the Wyld, the Weaver, and the Wyrm. Some believe the members of the Triad are great spirits, whilst others think they are a different type of entity altogether. It's agreed that they are beyond mortal comprehension, and they are never encountered directly. Originally, the Triad were in balance, with the Wyld creating raw matter, life, and spirit, the Weaver giving form and function to these creations, and the Wyrm destroying them to make room for their creations. This is no longer the case. The Weaver has grown stronger through human influence, while the Wild's power retreats as natural resources are depleted. The most dangerous of these, the Wyrm, feeds on evil and destroys indiscriminately, with its power growing and fears of an impending apocalypse. There are different stories about how these imbalances came about. One common tale is that the Weaver trapped the Wyrm, causing it to fall into madness. However, others claim that the Weaver is insane and the Wyrm's destructive nature is an attempt to restore balance. If it was not apparent, the Weaver is the strongest of the Triad, and depending on who and what you ask, the Weaver is also the most dangerous. It was believed that the Weaver's role was to bring order to the chaotic creations of the Wyld, shaping them with form and purpose for the duration of their existence before they were eventually destroyed by the Wyrm, thus maintaining a balance between creation and destruction. It is through the Weaver and machinations that it creates that the concept of intelligence came into being. With the expanding of human civilizations and advancements in science, the structure of society has become more limited and the sparks of magic have faded out of existence. The development of technologies has expanded so rapidly throughout the Industrial Revolution and the 20th century at paces far greater than the entirety of the human race, and many with some feeling that reality as we know it will cease to exist as the unchecked growth of her pattern web, a mesh holding the universe together, chokes and traps any and all. As a result, many guru hold the Weaver responsible for the imbalance in the Triad. To understand how and why things changed, we must go to the beginning of it all, Gaia and the primordial darkness she existed in. I have spoken of Gaia as Mother Earth, but she is more than such basic human trappings. Gaia is the entire cosmos, with the planet as our most important and vital aspect. The mythology of the Guru and Pharaoh tells of three great spirits responsible for the creation, preservation, and destruction of all things. There are multiple contradictory stories about the Triad, including debates about whether they were created by Gaia, whether they created each other, and whether they always existed. The Weaver's task was not so grand to begin with, at least from the perspective of one of the Triad. Whilst the Weaver did not mind the Wyld gave movement to the universe, it did not take too kindly to the activities of the Wyrm, who, at this point, caused the stars to eventually end, explode their elements into space, and collapse into black holes, the former contributing to the eventual planet and the life that govern on their faces. This removal of astronomical dead weight was seen as flaws to the Weaver. This would further confuse her with the expansion of life out of Gaia. As spirit and physical worlds mingled and coexisted as one, the Wyld allowed it to change, evolve and grow, becoming ever more complex, guided by the rules of the Weaver, whilst the Wyrm balanced it with entropy, decay and all forms of death. The Weaver did not like nor make sense of this. What was the point of providing rules and structure, only for them to be broken and destroyed constantly? It is in this anguish that her mind would snap, and in retaliation, she performed the greatest of tantrums in all of existence. She wove a barrier separating the physical and spiritual worlds, known as the Gauntlet. The cries of reality fell on deaf ears, as order had to not only be restored, but imposed. This would mean she would have to make sense out of the Wyld, biding it to make the world make sense to her. The Wyld would not stay trapped within the Grandmother Spider's webs, which only angered the Weaver tenfold. The existence of the Wyrm, forever a source of nihilistic annoyance to her, was the perfect fiend to inflict her wrath upon. He was easier to ensnare into her webs, and the consciousness of the Wyrm exploded, and his serpentine head split as he tried to force his way through her webs, forming the Hydra. Maddened and filled with hate, his dark thoughts bled into reality, taking the form of Banes and other vile spirits, seeking revenge on his captor ever since. This did not matter to the Weaver, and I doubt she'd even know. The Wyld, she knew, would eventually become too weak, which would allow her to trap it. Ignoring it, she set out to work attacking the Umbra and Gaia itself. Her pattern spider set to work on the Umbra, and the Weaver discovered the apes of the Umbra that would become the first proto-humans, adopting them as her own children. The Anansi would argue differently, but that is a separate conversation. In teaching them the basics of survival, she requested that they help bring them order to the world. At first, she was pleased how these new gifts were being used with Gaia's children, and how the Guru taught the humans how to fend for themselves. The Stargazers proposed these gifts took three forms: dogma, science, and technology. Dogma revolves around human religions they weren't directly handed down by the Weaver. The Guru often assume human religions are flawed versions of old Gaia worship. In some ways they are, as certain rituals stem from older rites. The Weaver became interested in religion because it explained the world spiritually, hoping humanity would discover facts about the spirit world and impose order. After the Impergium, when humans began building cities and shapeshifters warred, the old ways faded. New gods emerged, blending with older beliefs, but the Guru and the other shapeshifters tried to keep them tied to Gaia. In the Middle East, monotheism arose, especially with the Hebrew god, which led many to turn away from Gaia. Although some aspects of Gaia worship survived, like in Hinduism and Shintoism, monotheistic religions became dogmatic, demanding obedience and suppressing freedom. The Black Furies call this entity the Patriarch, a spirit born from unwavering belief, now corrupted by the Wyrm's influence. This led to countless atrocities, from crusades to religious violence, with dogma being a key tool of both the Weaver and the Wyrm. Fundamentalism, growing in the late 20th century, further highlights the Weaver's descent into madness. Religion, originally a spiritual guide, has calcified into rigid dogma, demanding conformity and crushing diversity. This tragic distortion of faith has led to the widespread suffering and spiritual decay. Science, long tied to the Weaver, has faced setbacks throughout history, especially during the fall of the classical Greece and the Middle Ages due to dogma. While many branches of science are benign, biology has been prone to abuse. Historically, vivisection, cutting open the live animals, was used to understand life, and animals seen as mere machines incapable of feeling pain. Worse, this mindset extended to certain humans deemed unworthy of consideration, leading to unethical experiments on marginalized groups, a practice that still occurs in some parts of the world today. Science, open to studying anything measurable, could theoretically explore the spirit world, including the Umbra and its supernatural denizens. This possibility poses a threat to the Guru, especially as developmental neogenics amalgamated DNA scientists who've encountered our kind seek to capture and study us in a hope to find a cure. Though DNA doesn't yet fully understand the Guru, it may only be a matter of time before they do. If scientists were to publish such findings, it would lead to a widespread hunt for the Guru. DNA scientists likely feel free to subject Guru captives in similar horrors, driven by human arrogance rather than the Wyrm. Animal experimentation continues on a massive scale today, and while such practices are justified as being in society's interests, the rights of those experimented on are often ignored. Science, influenced by the Weaver, has also birthed the seed of technology, posing yet another challenge for the Guru. Technology was the first seed the Weaver implanted in humanity. It has had the most visible impact on Gaia, shaping the world and benefiting humans by extending lifespans, increasing populations, and imposing order on society and nature. Early tools for hunting and gathering, followed by agriculture, revolutionized human life. The invention of the plow allowed for larger food production, leading to cities, bureaucracies, writing, and laws. The Weaver was pleased, but the Wyrm found ways to exploit the new societal structures. Agricultural advancements, especially since the late 19th century, have often caused harm. Events like the Dust Bowl and the overuse of toxic pesticides and antibiotics in modern farming show the destructive overlap of the Weaver and Wyrm influences. Despite this, technology and the Weaver's gifts are not inherently corrupt. With balance, they could improve life for both humanity and the natural world. By the Ice Ages, when the apes had lost their furs and were wearing the wand of the mammoths and animals they had slain, the Guru, horrified ancestors decided that these humans were influenced by the Wyrm and the Impergium would follow, which you know a bit about already. One detail I omitted at the time was that this would be the last time mankind would be at the mercy of anything, besides themselves, ever again, and it'd be far too late when the nation realized they were responsible. If you were to warn the cub when the Weaver had succeeded in perfecting her adopted children, it was during the 14th century with the invention of the fully mechanical clock. Yes, really, time and day had a set place, dictated by human schedules. As cities and industry grew, so too did the retaliation of the Wyrm as it wrestled in agony. Just look at London or any city. With every step of progression came pollution, reaching a choking head during what humans call the Industrial Revolution. It was the perfect trap for the Weaver and her fully fleshed babies worked to expand her empire on Earth, and you didn't need to be experiencing any of this to make an impact. Mortals, regardless of age and sex, were indispensable workers, and while standard of living was introduced as a humane practice and technology would improve throughout the 20th century, it also gave them most atrocities and changes than any other century in existence, maddening the Weaver and feeding the Wyrm. The influence of both, particularly the former, has made the human race weak. Rather than hunting for food, it is handed to them in toxic plastics. Rather than travel on foot or with allied animals, they're in self-contained boxes with their own controlled environments, scurrying like cats out of the rain. They depend on science and technology, leaning on it for safety. Everything has made sense for the Weaver once, but I doubt she remembers why she did it, for all it is remaining to her. She is mad, but more stable than the Wyrm. Barely. The relationship of the two is symbiotic, as the Wyrm is able to corrupt the creations of the Weaver for its agenda rather than the Wyld, but in his desire to recreate the world in his image, he subconsciously aids his ancient enemy. Humanity has the Weaver in all that it does, as do some animals. If it has intelligence to use tools, the mark of the Weaver is there. You may think I limit this to apes, but remember that certain animals can use the environment for shelter and homes. We now expand to many birds and aquatic creatures. Humans, of course, are the best at this, unaware of the beasts they feed. The fruits of humanity have only puzzled the Weaver more as the disorganized nature in which humanity flourishes and spreads its divided and diversified taint. What I mean to say is that the Weaver is becoming more unstable as time progresses. You only need to look at how rapidly things are developed to get a glimpse inside of the mad mind of a godlike being. The Weaver has three incarna: the machine, the manifestation of a gift of technology; the patriarch, the manifestation of dogma; and science, the manifestation of science. Make note of this three-headed, three-pronged personality to the Weaver when we talk about the Wyrm cub. But as for the Weaver Incarna themselves, the machine has grown alongside humanity's technological advancements. With the computer age, it is now near full awareness, projecting its thoughts through the digital web. Computers are everywhere, linked by the internet, and by the machine it is growing rapidly, possibly reaching the Celestine status soon. Some Glasswalker Theurges are concerned it could challenge Gaia, though others believe the machine is meant to help, not harm her. Fearing reprisals, they hesitate to inform other tribes. Meanwhile, the machine is gaining strength, which could play a key role in the impending apocalypse. In contrast, the Patriarch's power has stagnated since its peak in the Dark Ages, but could rise again with modern fundamentalism. This movement taps into the machine to spread its message, possibly posing future threats to both the Guru and Gaia. The Incarna of science, if it exists, is becoming subservient to the machine as the pursuit of knowledge for its own sake fades. Science has nearly merged with the machine, and its cries for help are largely ignored. If this trend continues, any hope of restoring the Weaver's mind may be lost, leading to severe consequences. Another connection between the Weaver and the Wyrm is their spirits. Banes and Weaver spirits feeding off the desolate realm of the Umbral Realm. The Scar, filled with endlessly toying buildings ruled by the Bane spirits, the best representation of the Weaver's maddened desire to control, to rule, and creating a nightmare for all that inhabit it, and how little she cares for it all. A much larger realm that is pure in the Weaver's influence is the Cyber Realm, which has grown massively since the 20th century. Ironically, it does not move with the other realms, and it is possible to visit it through the same moon bridges, though no one has visited the Weaver's personal realm at the fairest reaches of the Dark Umbra, the Deep Umbra I should say, and I would advise you not to even try. Even the Glasswalkers, the shameful pawns of the Weaver in her industrial revolution, who grew more detached and uncomfortable using more wildest gifts and fetishes, stuck to their precious cities, willingly trapped to their mother's webbing, would be so foolish to try and suck her spider tits either. I do not want you to think, Cub, that the Weaver is the Wyrm in another form. Yes, there is much to be said about these seemingly antagonistic approaches and the never-ending way against the Wyld, but she is necessary for us to function, he says through gritted teeth. All things have forms and functions which would not even be concepts without her. Laws of nature would be total chaos, unformed, shifting matters of raw energies where only those that have survived the maddening ordeal would survive. The Weaver, to some, is an ally, to others the enemy. But the thing you should remember, Cub, is that she is not malicious in her actions, nor she is some benevolent god. What we have is a spirit that is some embodiment of unyielding. It is her way, or nothing. If it was not apparent, the Wyld is the weakest of the Triad. The Wyld serves as a generative force, giving rise to absolute chaos. The Weaver then brings order to this chaos before it is ultimately destroyed and returned to chaos by the Wyrm. While the other two aspects of the Triad went insane, the Wyld is gradually diminishing, being suppressed by the Weaver and recklessly destroyed by the Wyrm. The Wyld, Cub, is not Gaia. Gaia, to many of the shapeshifters who call her mother, understand Gaia as life in spiritual and physical form, encompassing all that exists within, above, and beneath the earth, and the spirits that exist within the Umbra. To some, she is the personified son of the Triad, whilst others place her below. The Wyld, in either of these modes of thought, is the personification of the primal spiritual forces that serve her as a whole or something greater. But the Wyld is not Gaia. It is the fuel of nature, but it is not the nature. The trees around us and the grass you press between your fingers are things you and I can comprehend. It's tangible. Yes, the Wyld provides the raw force that becomes the life as we perceive and understand it. This makes our relationship with the Wyld incredibly simple. Without it, there would be no life, and we would not exist. Our physical forms are sculpted from these energies provided by the Wyld. This would mean that we serve the Wyld. Yes, well, as all things, Cub, there is nuance to be had. Yes, the Black Furies and the Red Talons are the two primary Grue tribes that honor the Wyld, and the Ratkin revere it more than Gaia, and we understand the Wyld is the foundation of life and the agony it now suffers. But the Wyld does not choose sides. A cancer does not choose how or what it spreads through. It, by itself, is not good or evil, but the matter's perspective influences our opinions on it. The Weaver may have fashioned humans as her minions, but the Wyld would provide viruses and illness to manage their numbers. The Wyld does not have much regard for the life it creates. This may bother you, but the Wyld does not love or hate. It is energy, forever changing, and forever finding the shape through the control of the Weaver, which, as we have already discussed, is not a bad thing, assuming the Triat is in balance. In short, the Wyld is a possibility, and it is everywhere. But things did resemble some semblance of balance once, where the spirit and material worlds functioned practically as one, functioning in near symmetry. The Triat understood their places and how they resembled Gaia. If the Weaver is her logic, the Wyrm is in the immune system. The Wyld was not only the blood, but the heart that pumped life through Gaia's metaphorical body. This mythical golden age has been sung by Galliards throughout the ages, a time when everything seemed perfect and unified and united in a harmonious voice. But if history, actual history, has taught you anything, cub, you will know that means what is defined as harmony is often led through a dictatorship. From the perspective of the Wyld, the severing slaughtered any chance of balance. I speculated one host of theories to you when we spoke of the Weaver, and 10 theurges would give you 12 ideas, but what we know is that the Weaver and Wyrm would begin their clash, maddening them both. This probably fed and encouraged the evolution of creatures, learning the concept of cruelty and violence, becoming more selfish in the process, which would naturally cause an imbalance as tribes of mortals and Grue demonstrated ideas of superiority. Might meant right, and the old ways and spiritual faith would be lost through time, with the most modern of humans barely paying lip service to spiritual beliefs, but worshipping their capitalist overlords. The result? The exile of the Wyld on the physical plane, barely able to pass through the gauntlet. Through time, pools of Wyld energy in the physical world, known as thresholds, have become incredibly rare. I have not seen them myself, but I have been told they exist, so take it with a pinch of salt. Do I dare suggest the Wyld too is mad? Yes, yes I do, but like the Wyrm and Weaver, it does share one another emotion. Rage. A lack of self-preservation as it tries to restore balance is the most popular theory, but let us not forget that the concepts of right or wrong are emotional states associated with creatures, and the Wyld is beyond this, and yet much simpler. The Wyld merely knows that there is a need for balance for survival, and survival is all that matters. So does it even feel rage then? You can ponder that in your own time, but it has certainly been driving to the edge of its tether, struggling to achieve balance, and it would swallow the world whole and create a new one to achieve Gaia's will, and I'm certain that the Wyld would serve as the ultimatum one way or another. Yes, it is trapped in the Umbra by the Weaver, but the Wyld is not weak. It just has a lack of focus or attention span if we humanize it for a moment. The Umbra is the Wyld's battleground, using guerrilla-like tactics, striking unexpectedly with varying degrees of success as it fights to return to the physical world. Seems quite extreme, does it not? Well, one has to be what you kids would refer to as harsh. Adherents of the Wyld, the aptly named Wyld spirits, notably only reflect its master, but as the most extreme and chaotic spirits within the Umbra, so I would advise you to stay clear of them should you enter the Umbra, and try to restrain any inexperienced fear from summoning them. Rational is not a concept familiar to Wyld spirits. Wyld spirits are not bound to one personality or form either. They are unbound and fluid, reflecting the complex and confusing state of the Wyld. What is known is that Wyld needs Gaia to survive, and she is dying, slowly, painfully, by the hands of her children. The Wyld relies on Gaia's spirituality to fuel life, thriving in this connection. However, it prefers reshaping the world freely rather than being confined. Few Guru grasp the real threat at play, while most elders blaming the Wyrm or Weaver for the coming end, unaware that the chaos in Gaia reflects a deeper war in the Umbra. The Weaver and Wyrm clash in the physical realm, but the Wyld, mostly trapped in the Umbra, build strength there. Its occasional attacks on the Weaver are erratic and hard to sustain. If the Wyld were to win, even skeptics would view the resulting reality as hell on Earth. Ironically, the Wyrm has suffered most of this cosmic struggle. The Wyld knows peace with the Weaver is impossible without the Wyrm, and without balance, it too would perish. As the apocalypse nears, the conflict grows more violent. Few truly comprehend the Triat's power plays, myself included, which are far beyond mortal and Guru understanding. While the Guru work to strengthen the Wyld, it sees their aid as incidental. The Wyld wouldn't mourn the loss of millions of Guru, viewing them as expendable in the greater battle, which puts its followers in peril, fighting both enemies and friendly fire. I hope you would know by now that the Wyrm is our enemy, and what I share with you is to better equip you for the dangers ahead, rather than attempt to indoctrinate you. Why do I feel the need to preface this? Well, most within our nation raise an eye at the fact that the Wyrm is considered one of the highest Celestines. It was originally tasked with cleansing and balancing creation by driving it toward entropy. Its role was to eliminate what the Wyld creates and the Weaver structures, ensuring the eternal cycle of birth and death continued. Guru theologians generally agree that the Wyrm was the second member of the Triat to go mad. When the Weaver became insane and began encasing everything in its webs to preserve its creations, the Wyrm was gradually trapped and unable to perform its intended function. This confinement led to its descent into fury and madness, driving it to destroy indiscriminately, regardless of whether something's time had come. Now, the Wyrm exists as a dark god, symbolizing destruction, chaos, corruption, and darkness, the very forces the Guru fight against. Each tribe has its own version of the myths, using cultural language to describe the Wyrm's fall and nature. This, of course, is a short summary of events, as each tribe has different ways of telling the downfall of the Wyrm, so pay attention, cub. In the beginning, before the mortal concept of understanding of beginning, the three spirits of the Guru and Pharaoh known as the Wyld, Weaver, and Wyrm exist in an ever-expanding nothingness. They were pure in the sense that they was each no more or less than what it was set out to do, existing to follow its purpose and react to their counterparts, testing the possibility of their powers and their limits, if such a concept even existed then. The Wyld was unbridled chaos, pure emotion and change. The Weaver was the inverse, the mistress of order and stasis without value or purpose, the first to master the arts of binding and keeping, granting form to the substance and form to the energies of the Wyld. The Wyrm was and still is not either of these things, existing as the border between the two, ensuring balance through decay. I spoke to a stargazer who believed the Wyrm did this by snapping at the Celestine that was out of balance, somehow described the primordial Wyrm as something of an Ouroboros, whilst some have presented evidence that the Wyrm devoured the excess and replaced it with its own excretations. I shan't share my source of the last one, but you're entitled to believe what you wish. The Wyrm is perhaps the only of the Triad that understood the importance of balance and the harmony that could bring, creating the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. Some would have you believe that the so-called Big Bang came from such unity. I've always found it such a stupid name. Typical humans, they're giving such an important name after carnage and destruction, the epitome of their kind. But I digress. This explosion of life, as it were, granted consciousness to not just life, but the Triad as well. This allowed all life, including the Triad, to reflect on each other's work and existence, and you'll know where this would lead. Total insanity. As we have discussed before, the madness of the Triad is commonly associated with the Weaver entrapping the Wyrm, and all the evil stems from that, but some place the blame on the Wyld's resilience to be bound to order, or the Wyrm simply failing to uphold its duty, but one cannot blame one over the other. Yes, the Weaver started it, but what we have now is a tango for free. Exhausted from endless destroying the ever-growing web, the Wyrm was confused. The balance it once maintained became stagnant, seen as decay in this physical world and the corruption in the spiritual. With the Triad's balance unbroken, the Weaver's web spread unchecked, leaving the Wyrm trapped. Unable to foster new growth or destroy freely, the Wyrm, now controlled by another, grew desperate, wanted to vow its own tail to symbolize unity, but it now did so out of blind imposed anger. Its struggles only tightened the web's grip, and its original purpose was lost in the agony of its entrapment. The Wyrm, however, had one more ace in this metaphorical deck, and that was the gift of transformation, which takes on the properties of growth and destruction, despite not being directly one of the other. Doing so would allow the Wyrm to squeeze bits of itself through the Weaver's web and manipulate whatever it could to hold of the whatever realm it managed. And this did not happen in one go or attempt. Collectively called the Hydra, the many heads and aspects of the Wyrm make up the Triatic and Urges Wyrms, and all that serve the Wyrm work for one of the Urges or one of the head of the Triatic Wyrm. They manifest in Malpheus, the twisted, chaotic realm of the Wyrm, deep in the Umbra, filled with unimaginable horrors that can drive people insane. Ruled by the Melgin Incarna, 13 beings who often fight each other as much as they battle the Guru. Each controls a domain reflecting their sinister nature. Lady Afe, the Caliph of Pain, tortures the body, while Doge Calypse, the Archbishop of Madness, shatters the mind. The most infamous area is the Black Spiral Labyrinth, a mind-bending structure that drives those who enter into madness. Black Spiral dancers take their name from this maze, seeking dark truths but often losing their sanity. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself, Cub. You're not ready to learn about Malpheus, at least from the Guru perspective and not one of the Black Spiral dancers. Let us return to the transformation of the Wyrm. The first metamorphosis was the Triatic Wyrm, extending into the loosest of the Weaver's webs, serves as the most powerful aspect of the Wyrm. As the name indicates, there are 3 heads, each one unaware of the original goals and motives of the Balance Wyrm, which is said to be buried deep within Malpheus. It is possible for the Triatic Wyrm to manifest outside of Malpheus, so I'm told, but doing so would exhaust great amounts of unequal energy would be needed to send it back. We are talking Croatan Great Sacrifice levels of energy, Cub, which drove the Eater of Souls, one part of the Triatic Wyrm, back to Malpheus. As I mentioned it already, the Eater of Souls, the consuming Wyrm, composed of huge jaws which could open as wide as a python's bite, as a certain dark chronicle details, embodies the Wyrm's relentless drive to consume everything in its quest of meaning. However, unlike the Weaver, which seeks to impose order on creation according to its nature, the Eater of Souls mindlessly devours all in a futile attempt to regain the control it has lost over the universe. The loss of primordial balance left a void in the original Wyrm, and in its madness, it believes that devouring all within its reach will fill that emptiness. On an individual level, this manifests as greed, desire, and obsessive preoccupation, often seen in the pursuit of material possessions, knowledge, or social status, things mistakenly believed to satisfy deeper spiritual needs. Physically, its power can cause the wasting of the body through disease, the draining the victim's life force to sustain the all-consuming aspect. The Magier Furefuge, associated with the Urge Wyrm Lefarg, serves the Eater of Souls, particularly in this seeking ways for it to manifest again in the Gaian realms. Next, we have the Beast of War, the Calamity Wyrm, whose head was thick and bony with the massive ramming horns. If the Beast of War embodies the unleashed force of the wild, but instead of a fostering creation, it manifests as a pure destructive power, while the wild's destructive aspect clears away rigid forms to allow for new growth, the Beast of War leaves only devastation in its path with no hope for renewal. It is the primal embodiment of the Wyrm's fury over its imprisonment, wrath incarnate. This force represents our blind hunger for violence. Without the Predator's calculated focus, the Avengers' release, or the Peacekeeper's regret over the use of lethal force, the Calamity Wyrm rarely deals into directly manifest, as its influence has always been closer to hand in the Gaian realms. In humans, it surfaces as the collapse of healthy competition into bitter conflict, and the bloodlust that, in the chaos of battle, fails to distinguish between friend and foe. In vampires, it is this beast that's said to naught their fragile connection to humanity. Among the Guru, it appears as their rage, which, if not controlled, can obstruct their spiritual gnosis and divert them from their higher purpose. The Geta Fenris know this as Yorgamonda, or however the word's pronounced. I know I should be able to pronounce that fluently, but I am not perfect. The Midgard Serpent, that is, the Najin Incarna, Hellbringer, associated with the Urge Worms Ba'ashakai, spread strife and discord across the world in the name of the Calamity Worm. The last of the Triatic Worm is the Defiler Worm, whose head is narrow and pointed, like a needle. The Defiler is the worm's distorted reflection of itself, poisoned by self-loathing for having failed in its original purpose. Once a guardian of cosmic balance, the worm has degenerated into an agent of stagnation and decay, its influence manifesting as the spiritual corruption of the soul. This corruption drives its victims to dangerous extremes, stripping them of free will. Having tainted itself, the worm has externalized its self-hatred, seeking to corrupt and dominate everything in a twisted bid to regain control over the world. The Defiler is the most powerful of the worm's aspects, a silent and insidious force that operates from within, sowing subtle suggestions that lead its prey to willingly submit to its influence. As a tempter and seducer, it is remembered in human mythology as the serpent in the Garden of Eden, and its association with the fallen angel, Lucifer, hints at the deeper cosmic tragedy of the primordial worm. Unlike the other aspect of the worm, the Defiler is so intelligent and self-aware that there is no need for a Malian to Incarna to act on its behalf. The second attempt came in the form of the Urge Worms, forming from the desperate and frenzied thoughts of the worm and endowed with a limited degree of independence and autonomy. Roaming free, they insinuate themselves into the heart and mind of any creature that was receptive to their influence. Given their names, these suggest and tempt those who listen, rather than receptive to their influence. Given their name, these suggest and tempt those who listen, rather than manifesting physically. Though it can't break free, its thoughts, desires, and twisted emotions slip through the cracks, seeking minds that resonate with their dark urges. These emotions are far beyond human comprehension, extreme feelings of shame and madness from a force that not even the most enlightened, could truly understand or want to. Once part of the worm's original balance, these urges became corrupted over time, losing their purpose and now preying on mortals who hear their whispers. Their only weakness is their link to the Majin, or if a Majin, a Dark Lord, is destroyed through its specific vulnerability, the corresponding urge is weakened for a century, though it eventually recovers, while the Urge Worms easily use mortals. Stronger vessels are sometimes needed, and this is where the Majin Incarna come in. Powerful spirits that serve as the ruling nobility of the worm's baned hordes. Once mortal, they become embodiment of their urges, acting as their eyes and claws to carry out their will. However, other servants of the worm often see the Majin as rivals or irrelevant, and not all urges are represented by them. My knowledge of them is rather limited, so I do encourage you to go and research for those who dare to study the intricacies of the worm, but allow me to give you the very limited names of the Urge Worms. We have Phobok, the Urge of Fear; Vorus, the Urge of Greed; Mastrak, the Urge of Power; Kanala, the Urge of Desire; Abhora, the Urge of Hatred; Agnur, the Urge of Cruelty; Bahashakai, the Urge of Violence; Kalabu, the Urge of Consumption; Peslak, the Urge of Lies; Sarakaya, the Urge of Paranoia; Gree, the Urge of Despair; and Lethargy, the Urge of Apathy. You also have amongst them the Elemental Worms, which are the elemental spirits of the worm itself. Shocking, I know. The elements that comprise the world are reflected in wormish metaphysics, thought to be created from the excretions of the primordial worm, which spread across the universe when the Weaver constricted its body. These repulsive substances manifest physically in the material world, but also have a connection to the components of the conscious mind. These worms lack intention or veilation into the triatic and urge worms. They exist primarily as resources to be exploited by the other worm servitors. The elemental magie arcana can't be linked, not even through rumor, to mortal lives, leading to some to question where their ranks come from or how they are replenished. The known elemental worm spirits are Wyld, worm of sludge, born from the waste of the worm and connected to its sensations. Huga, worm of smog, born from the gaseous part of the worm and connected to its intellect. Famas, worm of balefire, born from the blood of the worm and connected to its willpower. Waksha, worm of toxins, born from the body influences of the worm and connected to its emotions. There's more to share, Cub, as I've already alluded, but again, you're not ready. Some say I've shared too much, but if I have, I suppose time will tell what Guy has planned for us both. Morbidity aside, you should have learned by now that the worm is not a villainous, mustache-twirling mastermind trying to bring Gaia down, but a corrupt entity maddened by imprisonment in the webs of the Weaver who has grown too powerful her original intention and purpose. The worm is a force of entropy, of decay, that too has gone beyond its station. It is subtle and overt, festering in the heart of the greedy and violent, but it is not an omnipresent taskmaster, and directing all the evil doings in the world to the worm is wrong. It may pain you to hear this, Cub, but that is the truth. The worm corrupts and preys on purity. It doesn't make its pawns act, it guides and whispers sweet nectar their willing ears. So whilst anyone can have a battalion of brainless brutes, the worm would rather have loyal followers who can actually produce something meaningful to it, and that is the most horrifying part of it all.
To be kept updated, follow the Lore by Night VTM Instagram and Blue Sky pages to find out when we upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, and you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.